We start this half hour talking about how a man is in the hospital this morning after officials say he was shot by an Albuquerque police officer last night.
Yeah, this all started before 4 in the afternoon. That's when officers were called out to an open space near Tramway and Copper Northeast, where they say a man was camping illegally. Police say things escalated when the man became irritated after two officers confronted him. Then a crisis intervention team, a supervisor, and less than lethal force were all called out to the scene. After that, police say the man asked to talk with state police, so two of their officers went out to this area, but it still did not end.
We know factually that he kept producing knives and threatened the officers with knives.
APD Chief Gordon Eden there says officers tried using non-lethal force, but then an APD officer fired. That man is now in critical condition at UNM Hospital. Of course, you're going to have the very latest on this story. You can check KRQE.com for updates. Samantha McDonald will have a live report coming up in about a half hour. On some other news this morning at 5:32, attorneys in the case of a mentally ill man who was killed by police will have more time to make their arguments. Lawyers made their closing arguments on Friday. Christopher Torres, who was mentally ill, was confronted in the backyard of his family's home 3 years ago by two undercover APD officers who had gone to arrest him for a road rage incident. There was a struggle, and the officers claim Torres tried to grab one of their guns, so the other one shot him 3 times in the back. The family is suing for $4 million in damages. At the end of the civil trial, lawyers for each side had 5 minutes to sum up their cases.
He was a good guy. It was his house, and no one should have broken into his yard and shot him 3 times in the back.
The underlying schizophrenia, the lack of prescription medications, and the use of the drug spice created a situation that when these officers arrived, rapidly went downhill.
So you know this is a non-jury trial, so Judge Shannon Bacon there, who heard it, set a May 2nd deadline for lawyers to submit written arguments. She'll make her decision after that.
There's a big development in the lawsuit filed by the family of a young woman who was killed by a former APD officer. In February 2013, Sergeant Adam Casals, who was off duty, claims he was chasing a DWI suspect with his lights and sirens on when he ran a red light and slammed into the victim's vehicle. The city tried to argue it had qualified immunity against the lawsuit, saying that Casals was carrying out his duties as a police officer when the crash happened. But a judge decided the civil rights lawsuit stands. It can now go to a jury. Casals was fired from APD and charged with vehicular homicide. A close call in an Albuquerque neighborhood where bullets flew after a party got out of control. Henry Gonzalez says his neighbor's party in northwest Albuquerque went out of control. He says he heard people shooting down the street from his home. Bullets hit Gonzalez's house and the window, narrowly missing his 7-month-old grandson.
My daughter-in-law was holding him in her arms and the bullet passed by her head.
Police showed up. No arrest was made.
The Albuquerque police are now releasing lapel cam video of an officer-involved shooting where one man was killed. Take a look.
And there's a man that's following me, and he punched me in the mouth and is chasing me down the street.
It started with that 911 call. It came from the 7-Eleven on Central last December. The caller said Andy Snyder had a hammer and was outside the store. Officers Hector Marquez and Nathan Kadri went looking for Snyder. When they finally found him, officers say Snyder ignored their commands.
Put your hands on top of your head. Turn around. Put your hands on top of your head. Turn around.
Snyder took off and officers chased him down the alley. The officers fired beanbags at Snyder, but that did not stop him. And we stopped the video at the same time police did when then interim APD Chief Alan Banks showed Snyder holding a 10-inch claw hammer over his head as he ran at officers. That's what you're seeing right there. Police chased him farther down the alley until Snyder stopped. Officer Marquez fired the shot that killed Snyder. Snyder had a lengthy criminal history here in New Mexico and in Oklahoma. The state police officer who was caught on dashcam video shooting at a mom from Tennessee in her minivan full of kids will not be getting his job back. You remember this back in the fall in Taos. The driver, Oriana Farrell, refused to listen to state police officer orders and tried to drive away from them twice. The incident eventually led to Officer Elias Montoya right here shooting at the van's tires. He had been with state police for 12 years and was later fired. Mr. Montoya appealed, and we have learned he has reached a deal with the state, but no one is saying exactly what is in that deal. A state spokesman says they cannot disclose anything related to that settlement for 6 months. Meanwhile, Oriana Farrell is facing charges of aggravated fleeing, child abuse, and possession of narcotic paraphernalia. She was in court in Taos earlier this month. Her criminal trial is scheduled for October.
New Mexico State University researchers are helping with a national pilot program aimed at addressing addiction and mental illness. The researchers will focus on getting more accurate local data about behavioral problems to help get better resources in place. Doña Ana County is one of only 10 regions nationwide selected for the program, and MSU officials say New Mexico's rate of substance abuse and mental illness are higher than the national average. A peanut butter plant in eastern New Mexico is heading to auction. Sunland Inc. declared bankruptcy after a salmonella outbreak last year. A California company offered $18.5 million to buy it a few months. But now another company has expressed interest, so a judge will decide who gets the bid. Sunland owes 3 of its major creditors about $14 million.